Hey Tony, it's Friday, and first off, to answer your question of the week, as far as morally gray goes, I try to not just make it so there's no right or wrong answer. Both answers are equally wrong and equally right, and neither one is necessarily the best possible ending for everyone.
Why did you ask the lawyer to answer what amorality is when the lawyer is amoral initially? Like, why? Anyway.
What Taylor said. So this week I want to talk about national news because, oh boy, howdy, was it a week in the national news. The biggest news, of course, was that the House of Representatives voted to impeach Donald Trump. Now, there's a lot of politicking going on there, which is really what I want to focus on more, less on the impeachment itself and more on the politics of it. So, first off, for what an impeachment is, it's when the House votes to impeach a person. They argue they allege them of some form of wrongdoing. Generally, it's high crimes and misdemeanors is kind of the catch-all. But in this one, it was after the quid pro quo talk with threat with Ukraine that led to this. But it's been an interesting example of partisanship within our country. Now, the first part is that although Donald Trump, the articles of impeachment have been voted on, and he has been officially impeached. Nancy Pelosi came out today and said that she's not going to bring things to the Senate yet, which means the trial won't start for a little while yet, and it's a whole crap show, truly. Like, there are plenty of political arguments to be made of, was this actually a political attack? Was it also the fact when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell already said that the Senate stands with Donald Trump, when the Senate is supposed to be your fair and impartial jury? So it's there's a lot going on about it. But particularly what I want to talk about is the partisanship of this vote. So, hyperpartisanship and hyperpolarization is something that I've discussed on this channel before, and it's a couple things that I really do think are legitimate threats to our country's future. I have issues with a lot of identity politics out there. I have issues with a lot of the you're either with me or against me politics because, only Sith speak in absolutes.
Yeah, the Jedi do too.
They do.
Anyway.
But this was purely a partisan vote insofar as in the House. Now, there was not, I don't believe there was a single Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump. And the vote was almost entirely on party lines. There was one Democrat who switched parties a lot in part due to this due to the impeachment procedure. I think there were a couple independents who voted to impeach Trump as well. But it still kind of falls down to the point of this is very much a case of Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party versus a sitting president. Now, I am personally under the assumption that with the calls, with the testimony and everything, I do think that this was an appropriate impeachment. At least I think the initial investigation was proper. The hearings really did kind of sway me, but I'm not the target audience. I was fairly swayed as is due to my own personal feelings, but a lot of the evidence that came up during the hearings made me go, okay, yeah, this is probably ripe for impeachment. Now, there are a lot of issues to go over as to why the Democrats are burning their political capital right now, because they had to know starting off that even if it passed the House, it would not pass the Senate. The country has been so hyperpartisan since about the 90s. So I was reading a good article the other day that kind of helps explain this a little bit, explains this phenomena of polarization. Now, the country has always been partisan. It's always been polarized, going back to the very foundation. going between, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. It's really a myth to say there wasn't partisanship before. But this has crossed a whole new level in our lifetime. And what a lot of people much smarter and much more educated in political matters than I say is that a lot of what you can see can be traced back to when Newt Gingrich was sworn in as Speaker of the House in the 90s. I want to say 94. Yeah, I think it was 94 was when he was sworn in, was when the Republicans took back the House for the first time in 40 years. But his attacks on President Clinton and the eventual impeachment, which was actually, looking back, it was a rather partisan affair, but there were still, I think, 30 Democrats who voted to impeach and a handful of Republicans who voted not to impeach. But this was kind of the start of where we find ourselves today. Now, there's much to be said about identities, about beliefs, about how we get our news, about all of these things that lead into a hyperpartisan, hyperpolarized world. And I don't really have a solution as to break out of it. What I think would be one of the best things would be to just listen and talk to the other side, because now there are a lot of things that people who disagree with me on a lot of my viewpoints might say that could be valid. There are things that are not valid, much in the same way that I have things that I say that are probably valid and things that are slightly less valid and more just the echo chamber I find myself in. But it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future. Now, no matter what, Donald Trump is going to finish off his term. He's not going to get removed from office. The Senate's not going to vote to isn't not just they're not going to vote to remove him. It's just not going to happen. But it's going to be interesting to see exactly how this impacts the 2020 election. I The cynical side of me thinks that the Democrats are signing their own death warrants right now. Um, Impeachment is not popular, even in a case like this where there probably were high crimes and misdemeanors. There's going to be a lot of animosity. There's going to be a lot of issues, but we'll see, and only time will tell what happens in 2020. So, Tony, my question for you is: who are the only presidents to be impeached in the history of our country? Tony, I'll see you on Tuesday. Later, bro.